welcome to Cambridge Creative Encounters. We are so happy to share some of the research taking place here at the University of Cambridge on environment and climate change through a collaboration between our researchers and creative professionals from the UK and abroad. We live in a world of constant change, and some of these changes have a huge impact on our lives and the environment we live in today. Join our social scientists as they talk about some of these key issues, such as e-waste, smartphone industry's environmental commitments, and developing new materials in sustainable and economical ways. The combined skills of researchers and creative professionals bring this research to life. Through our short films, we hope to inspire and reach wider audiences and create opportunities for conversations and questions where we can share our expertise. We hope our films will open up new avenues of inquiry and can improve research, its relevance and impact. Please explore, question, and share your thoughts and ideas with us.
Climate change is a truly global phenomenon.
The weather's breaking, fires are raging.
Centuries of pollution from industrialization have accelerated this. For decades, scientists across the world have been creating solutions using nanomaterials. Nanomaterials have incredible properties because they are engineered at the scale of 1/1,000,000th of a meter. They can absorb carbon dioxide from factories, they can reflect heat from the sun, or they can power electric cars. However, few of these marvelous inventions ever enter the real world. Scaling up requires years of arduous experimentation, countless rounds of trial and error, and extremely expensive equipment. What if we could make a new way to make technology? Instead of using hazardous chemicals, we can use abundant and sustainable sources. Instead of tiring and error-prone experimentation, we can use artificial intelligence and robots. And instead of expensive equipment, we can use smarter and more flexible designs. Let's make differently to make a difference.
I'm Nicholas Jose, the researcher behind Small Solutions for Big Problems. My research for the past 6 years has focused on the development of mass production techniques for nanomaterials. And in particular, I focus on how to design reactors that can both safely and quickly produce high-quality materials, which can be used to combat the effects of climate change. So at the moment, I am focusing on non-toxic antimicrobials and fast-charging batteries as applications. My team has also formed a company to help bring our technology to the real world, which is called Accelerated Materials. My objective in collaborating with Susie and Jude in this film was really to provide an easily accessible and an entertaining way to introduce my research to the public. And because nanomaterials are often painted in a bad light in popular media, we also wanted to show how they can actually be beneficial for society. I hope that the audience comes away from this film with a new perspective on nanomaterials and a curiosity to learn more about our work.
I'm Jude Cowan Montague. Susie, Hannah and I were the creatives for the film, and it was great to work with Nick Script on nanotechnology, which shows how he and a new generation of scientists are using nanotechnology to help us move towards a better ecological future. And what I wanted to do was tie it into the protest songs of the 1960s and 70s, and I was thinking of artists like Joni Mitchell, so I got out my guitar and wrote a song in that kind of vein, and that has been used as part of the audio for the film alongside Nick's script, and the two echo each other. The other thing that I contributed was the textures for the film, because I'm a real world printmaker and we use those textures, and Susie helped coordinate this into the look of the film. And also I enjoy doing the character design because I love to draw people in pen and ink.
My role in this production was to maintain the visual narrative, so I made storyboards and put everything together. I did the compositing and the editing. I did quite a lot of animation, animating all the animals, playing with experimental animation techniques like spraying ink on glass to make it look as if you're looking down a microscope, and sort of creating collages really of different elements, some of which Jude drew and some of which I drew. So what we were trying to do, I think, was put forward quite scientific ideas in a way that is not hyper-real, which is what you expect from a scientific animation, but to do something very textural and almost tactile. Anyway, I really enjoyed collaborating and I learnt a lot from it, and I hope that the general public feel the same as we do, and I'd like to thank the collaborators. It was great.
Nanomaterials to the rescue. Nanomaterials to the rescue.
Hi everyone, my name is Sitska and I'm a final year PhD student at the University of Cambridge Judge Business School. And today I would like to talk to you about electronic waste. Now we all have electronics in the house and we all have to replace them at some point. But when you hand in your old laptop or phone for recycling, have you ever wondered what happens to it? Now this video gives a simple overview of the reverse supply chain, which is the sequence of steps taken from retrieving a product from the consumer to recycling or disposing it, and of course, everything that can go wrong in between. Now, understanding this system is important because ideally, we would like to recover as many materials as possible. This is better for the environment because it reduces polluting mining activities, but also forest degradation. But it's also beneficial for our society because it reduces our dependency on imports of raw materials from other countries. And this has become quite a big issue now with the current supply chain disruptions. But unfortunately, the large majority of electronic waste doesn't get recovered or recycled because it's not in the best interest of the firms involved in that reverse supply chain. So a few months ago, an American e-commerce company was found destroying 130,000 items a week in just one warehouse in the UK, which included smart TVs, laptops, and even drones, because it was cheaper than recycling or repurposing them. Now, reducing our electronic waste is, of course, key, but eventually goods do reach the end of their lives. And right now, there's just very little incentive for firms to properly deal with those. So I hope this movie will show how handing in your waste doesn't automatically mean that it ends up where it's supposed to. We do need society and regulators to step in and hold firms more accountable. Now, I want to conclude with a little more detail on the research itself. During my PhD, I developed this work in collaboration with agents from Europol, which is the European law enforcement agency, and they are responsible for recommending and enforcing several waste management policies in the EU. Now, research on this topic is important because the system is highly complex and not very transparent. So oftentimes well-intended policy interventions can backfire. So my research carefully considers the effect of different policy interventions and give some practical recommendations for regulators to avoid these unwanted activities in the reverse supply chain. I hope you enjoy this movie, and thank you very much for listening. When we discard our electronics because they no longer work, or we replace them, they turn into electronic waste, or e-waste. E-waste is the fastest growing waste stream, worth over $62.5 billion, which is more than the GDP of most countries. Yet, only 20% of e-waste is recycled. E-waste has valuable components. For example, your phone contains gold, copper, and palladium. But it also contains batteries, lead, and mercury. These hazardous and toxic substances complicate recycling and make it economically unviable. E-waste is not the only problematic waste stream. For the same reason, industrial waste is also rarely recycled. One example is waste oil. This also contains both valuable and hazardous substances. So what happens when waste is discarded and enters the system known as the reverse supply chain? Typically, there is a manufacturer who generates waste as part of its industrial processes or from end-of-life obligations, such as when you return your phone. From there, it goes to a treatment operator who treats the waste to immobilize the harmful substances and then recovers the valuable components for resale. The revenue is known as the recovery value. The problem is that when the recovery value is too low, alternatives become more attractive and waste starts leaking. These violations take largely one of two forms. Developed countries, where the majority of waste is produced, export to developing countries for cheap disposal. For instance, electronic waste is burned in the open air in order to retrieve valuable commodities such as copper. Other waste gets dumped, polluting water supplies and soils, and having a disastrous impact on the environment and public health. Secondly, the waste can also end up being dumped within the developed country. The area around Naples, for instance, is infamously known as the land of pyres because the dumped hazardous waste around the city keeps catching fire. Anti-dumping and anti-export policies have so far been unsuccessful in eliminating these channels. And one reason is that it is very difficult to assess the recovery value. And so it becomes impossible to predict if the waste will be recycled or leak. This research analyzes what anti-dumping and anti-export policy measures would be most effective in encouraging firms to pursue proper recycling when the recovery value is uncertain.
Smartphones. They help us communicate, navigate, shop, exercise, and entertain us. There are now over 6 billion smartphone users. Even before a new smartphone is taken out of the box, around 90% of its carbon emissions have been created. These are embodied emissions, the greenhouse gases emitted during manufacturing. The latest phones, such as the Apple iPhone X and Huawei P10, produce the most CO2 during production due to their specialized circuitry and larger storage. Manufacturing and transportation are a huge part of the smartphone's environmental costs. Smartphones start as minerals in the ground: lithium for the battery, aluminium for the case, silicon for the chips. These raw materials are extracted, transported, and processed into phone components, using millions of liters of water, thousands of workers, and millions of miles of transportation around the world. In the UK alone, the smartphone market generates around 1.5 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent per year. That is the same as powering over 180,000 homes for 1 year. Here's what you can do. All of us can ensure that we recycle, repurpose, or trade in our old smartphones when we switch to new ones. We can call on the telecommunications industry to report the environmental costs of their products. We can urge politicians to create laws that lead to a more sustainable industry. And as consumers, we can resist the pull of an upgrade and keep our phones for an extra year or more. So next time there's a new smartphone release, You can rest easy knowing that you don't need to be in the queue at midnight, but happily tucked up in bed, watching a climate change informational video.
People are passionate about their phones, but this also makes them vulnerable to the environmental impacts of creating their phones. We are Cambridge researchers working with the Minderoo Centre for Technology and Democracy, and this research looks at the environmental impacts of smartphone creation and the impacts of planned obsolescence.
In particular, we want to raise awareness to the idea of embodied emissions. These are the carbon dioxide emissions that occur before the phone even gets into your hand. Resource extraction, parts production, and device transport all contribute to embodied emissions. And we would like to shift the environmental onus away from consumers and on to the corporations while educating the consumer in the process.
This is an emotional as well as technological and environmental issues, as it concerns perhaps the most important piece of technology we own. We would like to draw attention to the issue that most of the environmental impact and emissions occur during the manufacturing stage and not when the consumer uses the phone. So the next time there is a smartphone release, we need to focus on upgrading the industry's environmental commitments rather than our phones.
The Centre has 4 research themes, one of which is something that we felt was really under-researched, which is the environmental impact of the tech industry. And we're producing research papers and white papers and stuff like that, but we also want to find ways of communicating with much wider audiences, which is why we're doing this.
As the climate crisis heightens, it is not only important to produce relevant research, but also to communicate this research in an understandable and engaging way. By working with our amazing animator, we learned how to effectively create a video in accessible animation.
I've learned so much during the whole process of this. It's been a really enjoyable project to work on. I think the most important thing I've learned is the significance of embodied emissions. And what a huge impact that has on the environment, something I've not really considered in the same way before this project. Looking at some of the stats and the figures, it's quite staggering, thinking of such a small item, having such a huge consequence environmentally, particularly when you think about how many there are. I think there's 6 billion worldwide, users at the moment of smartphones. It's a big number, and so it's been great working with the team, who are so knowledgeable, and it's been good to bring their story into a creative ending. So it's been lovely.